I'm going to show you the quadratic formula in this video. So we have been working on solving quadratics, and I have told you that there are three ways to solve a quadratic equation. The first way we learned is by factoring, and love factoring. The problem is if you have a polynomial that can't be factored, then you can't solve by factoring. So we have two other ways. One of them that always works is completing the square. And that is definitely has some advantages, but there's also some disadvantages to that one as well. The third way is quadratic formula. And this will work for all solving all quadratic equations. So to start off, I'm just going to give you the quadratic formula. So x equals, so remember we're solving, we're trying to figure out what x is. So using the standard form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, we are going to use the coefficients and the constant terms, so the a, the b, the c. We're going to use those numbers and basically just fill them into quadratic formula and then work it out using order of operations. So quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus, then we have the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all of that is divided by 2a. So that is what the quadratic formula, the one that we use. So this is the famous quadratic formula right there. Now, I will show you how this quadratic formula comes about. If you take this standard form right here of a trinomial and you complete the square, so if you do completing the square on this right here with the a, the b, the c, this is what you end up with. So it's another way of completing the square, basically. But what we're going to do is go right into our first example. We're going to take these three values, the a, the b, the c, and we're going to fill them in, and then we just evaluate using order of operations. So first example. So example number 1. Let's say we had c squared plus 10c plus 7 equals 0. So first up, want to mention that this trinomial right here cannot be factored. So solving by factoring wouldn't be an option on this one because there are no factors of 7 that would add up to 10. So I know that I either would need to do completing the square or quadratic formula. So since we're doing quadratic formula, we're going to do that. So I'm just going to go out to the side just to kind of help you get started here. The value of c is the constant, that's 7. The b is the coefficient on the variable, which is 10, that's our middle term. And the a is the coefficient on our x squared, or our quadratic term right here, and that is a 1. So what we're going to use is 1, 10, and 7 for the values of a, b, and c. So I got that just by looking right here. Standard form, I'm looking right here and getting those values from there. So now, to figure out what c is, what I'm going to do is just follow this along using these values. So negative b is going to be negative 10. And then we have plus or minus square root. All right, we need b squared. So b squared would be 10 squared. So that's going to be 100. And then minus 4ac means I need to multiply 4 times a times c. So 4 times 1 times 7. So that's going to be 28. And then all of this is over 2 times a, which is going to be 2 times 1, so that will be 2. So all that I did is using these numbers right here, these values for A, B, and C, I filled them into this equation. So now what we need to do is just use order of operations and simplify. So first thing I need to do is to take care of this square root. So we have negative 10 plus or minus. 100 minus 28 is going to be 72. So I have the square root of 72. And all of that is over 2. I know I can simplify the square root of 72. So if you need to, go over to the side. But negative 10 plus or minus, I know 72 would be 36 times 2. And then all of that is divided by 2. And then the last thing that I need to do is to see if I can simplify or reduce. And the rule is very simple. If right here, if I can make a triangle right there and reduce those by the same amount, then it can be simplified. So negative 10, 6, and 2 can all be reduced by 2. So my answer is going to be negative 5 plus or minus 3 square root of 2. And you could say over 1, but we don't need to. So remember that these are, could be split, 2 answers here. So C could be negative 5 plus 3 square root of 2, or negative 5 minus 3 square root of 2. But in any event, that is the solution for C. So what this shows is that, and if you think about the answers that we got when we did completing the square, it looks very similar, where we would have had the plus or minus 3 square root of 2, and then we must have subtracted the 5 over. So the answers should look very similar to the answers you get from completing the square. All right, let's try another one. So example 2. For this one, let's do, how about m squared minus 8m minus 9 equals 0. All right, so again, I'm going to start by identifying the values of A, B, and C. So A, B, and C. All right, so C is the constant term, which is negative 9. B is the middle coefficient, which is negative 8. And A is, excuse me, the leading coefficient, which is 1. So now, to figure out what M is, I am going to simply take these values and fill them into quadratic formula. So negative B is going to be a positive 8 plus or minus the square root of B squared. So negative 8 squared is going to be 64. And then I have a minus. Now I need to multiply 4 times A times C. So 4 times 1 times negative 9. So 4 times 1 times negative 9 is going to give me a negative 36. But remember, we're subtracting a negative, so that becomes a plus. And then all of that is going to be over 2 times A, which is 2. So now once I've filled it in, I just need to evaluate using order of operations. So we have 8 plus or minus the square root. 64 plus 36 is 100. All of that is over 2. Then we can simplify the square root. So we have 8 plus or minus 10 over 2. And at this point, I really don't need to reduce this. I can just go ahead and answer this. So there's 2 possible answers here. Since I don't have a square root left, I can go ahead and simplify this. So we have 8 plus 10 over 2. And the other one is 8 minus 10 over 2. So 8 plus 10 is 18 divided by 2 equals 9. And 8 minus 10 is negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So I know that the solutions for M could be 9 or negative 1. Now, since my solutions did not end up with a square root, then I know that this one could have been factored from the beginning. So again, if you can factor it, I prefer that way, but if you can't factor it, then completing the square or quadratic formula, whichever one is the way to go. All right, I want to try one more example showing you what this looks like if we have a leading coefficient. So I need to go on to the next page for example number 3. All right, so, hold on, let's go down here. Example number 3. So let's say we had 4n squared plus 24n equals -9. So a few things. First up, I'm not quite ready to pick the a, the b, and the c because it's not equal to 0. So I need to get this 9 back to the other side. So if I get this in standard form, I'd have 4n squared plus 24n plus 9 equals 0. So now I can go over here to the side and say that the value of a is 4, the b is worth 24, and the c is worth 9. Now, if you have seen the completing the square video, I mentioned in there that quadratic formula was not my favorite, and you're about to see why. So a lot of students like quadratic formula. They like how it's very easy, it's very straightforward, it's a formula, you just fill it in. But I'm going to show you why I don't always like quadratic formula. All right, so what we need to do is just fill these values in and then evaluate. So negative b is going to be -24 plus or minus the square root. All right, so now the first one up is the square, is b squared. So 24 squared, hopefully you know that, is 576. And then we have minus, now we have 4ac. So that means that we need to multiply 4 times 4 times 9. And this is where you're going to begin to see why I don't like quadratic formula. And then all of this is going to be over 2a, which is 2 times 4, which is 8. So now we need to simplify. So, and just use order of operations. So we have -24 plus or minus. All right, so right here, this is why I do not always care for quadratic formula. And that is because we have large numbers here. So when we subtract, this should give us 432. Hopefully I did that correctly. And all of that is over 8. So now we need to sit here and think of what do we know will go into 432, because we are trying to simplify our square root right here. So you could sit there and think, oh my gosh, I don't know, whatever. It does have a 432, so I'm pretty confident that 4 will go into it. So you could start there. But for this, I'm going to go out to the side so that you follow along. So if we have the square root of 432, 4 times 108 would be, and then we know the square root of 4 comes out as a 2. All right, we can break this down to be 9 and 12, and we know the square root of 9 is a 3. And then 12 we can break down to be 4 and 3, which gives us another 2. So 432 can be simplified to 12 square root of 3. So we have -24 plus or minus 12 root 3 all over 8. And then I mentioned in the first example, we want to look right here if we can reduce all of those by the same amount, and we can reduce all of those by 4. So we have -6 plus or minus 3 square root of 3 over 2. And there you have it. So if you need to, go back and rewatch it. Remember, there's never a problem with you going back and reviewing the video if we went too fast, or if you just need to watch it again for better understanding.